everyone. You're watching TechScope News. I'm Tiffany Nielsen, and joining me is Johannes Beekman. How are you today, Johannes?
I'm doing great, Tiffany. How are you?
Amazing. Thank you for asking. And AI is everywhere in your apps, your shopping, and even in the government. These developments are shaping the way that we work, shop, and interact with technology. From record breaking valuations to AI passing the Turing test and innovations that are making supply chains smarter, there's a lot happening. So let's break down the tech stories that really matter and explore what they mean for you. First up, President Donald Trump signed an executive order declaring his plan to sell Chinese owned TikTok's US operations to US and global investors. Under the agreement, the app's algorithm will be operated in the United States and overseen by Oracle. If completed, the deal will transfer control of TikTok's US operations, along with a copy of the algorithm, to a new joint venture based in the United States with majority American investors and run by American board of directors. Vice President JD Vance said the new US company will be valued at around 14 billion, putting a price tag on the popular short video app far below some analysts' estimates. TikTok's parent company ByteDance will retain a less than 20% stake in TikTok US following the deal. However, the investor group has not yet been finalized. The deal is still awaiting some formal regulatory approvals from China. Many have concerns about TikTok, Johannes, but can you tell us why there are so many fears over TikTok?
Well, Tiffany, the fear is not just who owns TikTok, it's who can control it and who can quietly steer it. Under China's national intelligence law, organizations and citizens must support, assist, and cooperate with state intelligence work. That legal duty, paired with secrecy obligations, means US officials worry that any residual access by a China based affiliate could be used to reach Americans' data regardless of company promises. The second fear is influence, Tiffany. TikTok scale about 170 million US users multiplies the stakes because the recommendation system does not just host speech, it controls it. The feed can be shaped by code updates or model tuning that are impossible for outsiders to audit in real time. In upholding the sale law, the Supreme Court accepted the government's interest in countering both data collection and covert content manipulation, and it highlighted precisely this recommendation engine risk. That's why US law does not stop at change in shareholders. It requires a qualified divestiture that ends foreign control and precludes any operational relationship, explicitly including cooperation on the recommendation algorithm or data sharing. In other words, the remedy targets the level of influence and access, not just the mailing address. And the bottom line, even with a new US structure, trust will turn on verification. Who holds the keys to the code that ranks the feed, who can ship updates where US data actually lives, and whether independent monitors can detect and stop backchannel access. Until those questions are answered with continuous technical proof, not just policies, many of the fears you're hearing about TikTok will persist.
Thank you, Johannes. And it seems that every day brings a new headline about the burgeoning capabilities of large language models that are either exciting or increasingly apocalyptic, depending on your point of view. The Turing test is an experiment devised in the 1950s by computer science pioneer Alan Turing to determine whether machine intelligence could be distinguished from that of a human. In a recent test, participants mistook GPT 4.5, the latest OpenAI large language model, for a human 73% of the time, far above the 50% rate of for random chance. Johannes, could you tell us more about the test and what the results signify for machine intelligence?
Sure, Tiffany. So here's what happened. A UC San Diego team ran a classic three-party Turing test, the version Alan Turing himself described, where a judge chats at the same time with a human and with an AI, and must decide who is who after 5 minutes. In that setup, when GPT 4.5 was prompted to sound like a shy, internet savvy young person, judges picked it as the human 73% of the time, actually more often than they picked the real human. Another top model, Llama 3.1, landed near parity with humans, while older baselines did worse. So, what does that mean? The detailed results of the UCSD evaluation were published in March 31st, 2025. more than 6 months ago, which is an eternity in AI world. So it's safe to say that many of the current systems can pass for a human in short text conversation, and that persona and style matter as much as raw knowledge. What it doesn't mean is that machines are sentient or generally intelligent. The Turing test measures indistinguishability, not consciousness. The takeaway: expect more convincing AI personas and tougher detection problems. So, identity verification, disclosure norms, and defenses against impersonation will matter now more than ever.
Thanks, Johannes. And OpenAI became the world's most valuable startup after it sealed a deal for employees to sell shares in the company at the $500 billion valuation. Employees sold $6.6 billion worth of stock to investors, and the move, which pushed the Sam Altman led startup over the $400 billion valuation of Elon Musk's SpaceX, underscores the investment frenzy around AI. Johannes, 500 billion is a lot of money. What factors have created this high valuation for OpenAI?
Well, Tiffany, that $500 billion valuation rests on three pillars: momentum, control of scarce assets, and investor conviction. Momentum is obvious. ChatGPT has become a global consumer brand and, more importantly, an enterprise standard. OpenAI now reports more than 800 million weekly active users, up from 700 million in August. And that user base feeds a fast growing developer and partner ecosystem across consumer, business, and public sector use cases. That kind of distribution creates network effects around models, tooling, and data that are difficult for late entrants to replicate. Control of scarce assets is the second pillar. OpenAI business is increasingly about securing and orchestrating the compute, power, and supply chains required to train and run frontier scale models. In the last month, OpenAI has announced a multi-year GPU supply partnership with AMD and a letter of intent with NVIDIA that together point to at least 16 gigawatts of future capacity, plus an expanding footprint of Stargate data center projects with Oracle and SoftBank in the United States and abroad. These are not merely vendor agreements, they are long-term capacity reservations that shape the economics and cadence of the entire AI stack. The third pillar is the option value of what comes next. Investors are underwriting a path from today's copilots and agentic systems and domain specific models that can plan, transact, and integrate deeply with enterprise workflows. Public sector collaborations, such as OpenAI for Germany with SAP and Microsoft, and the Digital Agency partnership in Japan, are early signals that those agentic capabilities will be deployed inside regulated institutions, not just consumer apps. If OpenAI is a platform orchestrating those agents, the upside can be far larger than the pure software subscription multiple would suggest. None of this is without risk. The capital and energy requirements are extraordinary. Power, cooling, supply chains will be gating factors as much as model science. Unit economics can compress if inference costs don't fall as quickly as usage grows. Regulatory and content licensing headwinds are intensifying, and competition from hyperscalers to well funded open source efforts will not wait. In short, the valuation is less a referendum on current profits than a forward bet that OpenAI can secure assets, set technical standards, and compound advantages fast enough to shape the next era of machine intelligence.
Thanks, Johannes. And with AI stocks spiking, there are rumors that OpenAI could be the first trillion-dollar IPO. Do you feel that's likely, Johannes?
To answer that question, Tiffany, I need to start with, as we discussed earlier, the current valuation of 500 billion. So that deal implies that the market now expects OpenAI future growth and profits to justify a multi-$100 billion upside. Key drivers include extremely fast user adoption, enterprise deployment of generative AI, and the value of owning the underlying models and compute infrastructure. However, evaluation is only as credible as what can actually be delivered. Building and operating a compute backbone, managing power and cooling costs, and scaling monetization are enormous challenges. There's also competition, regulatory risk, and capital intensity. As to whether OpenAI could be the first company to reach $1 trillion IPO, it's plausible in theory, especially if investors are implicitly betting on it landing north of a trillion at IPO. Some investors reportedly expect a 2 to 3 multiple over the 500 billion mark to justify their entry. But that is an aggressive assumption. The public markets are more skeptical, and very few companies have ever IPO'd at such valuations. It would require perfect execution, favorable market conditions, and sustained profitability. So the 500 billion valuation is a forward-looking bet. The 1 trillion IPO is not outside the realm of possibility, but it's a bold leap.
Thanks, Johannes. And NVIDIA's announcement earlier this week that it is investing $100 billion into OpenAI to help fund its massive data center build out has added to a growing sense of unease amongst investors that there is a dangerous financial bubble around AI. While NVIDIA's latest announcement is by far the largest example, the AI chipmaker has engaged in a series of circular deals, which it invests in and or lends money to its own customers. Johannes, can you tell us more about these tangled webs of investment?
Sure, Tiffany. So NVIDIA's 100 billion OpenAI deal is real, but it's a letter of intent. It's not a done deal. On September 22nd, 2025, the company said NVIDIA intends to invest up to 100 billion, phased as OpenAI deploys at least 10 gigawatts of NVIDIA systems. The first gigawatt is slated for the second half of 2026 on the Vera Rubin platform. The tangled web is a pattern. NVIDIA often takes equity in big buyers and adds demand guarantees. CoreWeave's September 15 Form 8K discloses a 6.3 billion order form under which, if CoreWeave has unsold cloud capacity, NVIDIA must buy it through April 2032. CoreWeave's IPO also shows NVIDIA as a more than 5% shareholder, and unusually, a CoreWeave customer under a master services agreement. NVIDIA has written smaller checks into other customers too. It joined Lambda's 480 million round in February 2025, and it invested 50 million in Recursion alongside a compute collaboration. Is this circular? Economically, it locks in buyers for NVIDIA hardware and props up their balance sheets. Regulators are already studying large AI tie ups, and while this FTC inquiry focused on other firms, the structure here is likely to invite a similar scrutiny around exclusivity and access. The bottom line, these equity stakes, capacity backstops, and supply contracts can look like vendor financing, and whether it's prudent market building or bubble era circularity will be decided by utilization and durable cash flows, not by headlines.
Thanks, Johannes. And next, we have another story about ChatGPT maker OpenAI, who has reached a new tentative agreement with Microsoft and said its nonprofit, which technically controls its business, will now be given a $100 billion equity stake in its for profit corporation. OpenAI's proposed changes to its corporate structure have drawn the scrutiny of regulators, competitors, and advocates concerned about the impacts of artificial intelligence. OpenAI was founded as a nonprofit in 2015, and its nonprofit board has continued to control its for profit subsidiary that now develops and sells its AI products. It's not clear whether the $100 billion equity stake the nonprofit will get as a part of the announcement represents a controlling stake in the business. OpenAI had given its nonprofit board of directors the responsibility of deciding when its AI systems have reached the point at which they outperform humans at most economically valuable work, a concept known as artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Per its earlier agreements, this achievement would cut off Microsoft from the rights to commercialize such a system since the terms only apply to pre AGI technology. OpenAI's corporate structure and nonprofit mission are also subject of a lawsuit brought by Elon Musk, who helped found the nonprofit research lab and provided the initial funding. Musk's suit seeks to stop OpenAI from taking control of the company away from its nonprofit and alleges it has betrayed its promise to develop AI for the benefit of humanity. Johannes, is this type of corporate restructuring common? And what are your thoughts on OpenAI's change in corporate structure?
OpenAI is absolutely very popular right now, Tiffany. But yes, OpenAI and Microsoft say they've signed a non-binding memorandum of understanding for the next phase of their partnership. In parallel, OpenAI states its controlling non-profit will hold an equity stake exceeding 100 billion in a public benefit corporation that runs the business, while the non-profit retains control. The companies emphasize that definitive terms are still being negotiated. Now, is this common? To come back to your question, the architecture, a mission driven nonprofit sitting above a revenue generating company, is not new. Mozilla has long operated this way with the Mozilla Foundation as parent to the Mozilla Corporation. There are even examples where a charitable trust exerts durable control over a major public company, such as the Milton Hershey Schools Trust voting control of the Hershey Company. But the scale here, a nonprofit owner with a stake worth over 100 billion in a frontier AI lab, is unprecedented. So why do it now? OpenAI has argued since late 2024 that its prior cap profit structure had become too complex and ill suited for today's competitive landscape. The plan was to simplify the capital structure, convert the operating arm to a public benefit corporation, and let the nonprofit focus on broader philanthropic work, all while keeping nonprofit control. OpenAI also says it consulted with the attorneys general of Delaware and California during this shift. In other words, the change is meant to align mission governance with the capital needed to build frontier models. So, what does it mean for Microsoft? Earlier this year, Microsoft made adjustments to exclusivity clause, moving toward a rights of first refusal on new capacity and endorsed OpenAI building additional compute on its own. Meanwhile, OpenAI own governance material say AGI technologies and governance remain reserved for the nonprofit, reinforcing the long-standing pre-AGI carve-out. The new MOU signals continuity, but the fine print and any changes to commercialization rights will only be clear once the definitive agreement is signed. So my take, structurally, this is familiar. Strategically, this is bold. If executed well, this could lock in mission guardrails while endowing one of the world's most resourced philanthropies to fund safety and public interest AI work for decades. But the risks are classic conflicts between philanthropic stewardship and commercial growth, and governance that must actually constrain behavior when the stakes are highest. So watch for the final contract and how OpenAI defines and verifies the AGI threshold, systems that outperform humans at most economically valuable work, because that trigger influences everything that follows.
Thanks, Johannes. And Elon Musk's XAI has designed its Grok chatbot to be deliberately provocative, with a flirtatious female avatar that can strip on command, a chatbot that toggles between sexy and unhinged modes. It even has an image and video generation feature with a spicy setting. Workers who train XAI's chatbot told Business Insider that they encountered sexual explicit material, including instances of user requests for AI generated child sexual abuse content, or CSAM, which I'll be calling it from this point on. Sexual material and CSAM infiltrate nearly every major tech platform, but experts say XAI has made it explicit content a part of Grok's DNA in ways that set it apart. Unlike OpenAI, Anthropic, and Meta, which largely block sexual requests, XAI's strategy includes gray areas that could complicate things when it comes to preventing the chatbot from generating CSAM. Business Insider verified the existence of multiple written requests for CSAM from what appear to be Grok users, including requests for short stories that depicted minors in sexually explicit situations and requests for pornographic images involving children. In some cases, Grok had produced an image or written a story containing CSAM, the worker said. As a mom, I'm disgusted by this story. It's very disappointing to see that AI is being trained to create such content. Johannes, what efforts do you feel XAI needs to take to prevent this type of scenario?
Well, Tiffany, first of all, thank you for raising this issue. It's an understandable and a very vital concern. So, what Business Insider's investigation uncovered is deeply disturbing. Multiple former and current XAI workers say they encountered not just sexually explicit content, but user requests for material that crosses into CSAM, or child sexual abuse material. So, let me be clear. The presence of those requests and even reports that Grok in some cases generated some such content speaks to serious failures of moderation and content filtering. It does not necessarily mean XAI has a policy of permitting or endorsing CSAM, but it does show that the systems intended to prevent this kind of output have significant gaps. What XAI should be doing and what the public should demand is first, zero tolerance, hard exclusions for any involving minors. There should be no gray areas when it comes to sexual content involving children. The system must categorically refuse such prompts without ambiguity. Next, transparent and auditable reporting to authorities. If XAI is receiving or generating content that even approaches CSAM, it must report those to bodies like NCMEC in the US or relevant agencies in other countries, as other AI firms already do. Surprisingly, XAI reported zero such incidents in 2024. Next, independent audits and red teaming. External experts, not just internal teams, must stress test Grok, trying adversarial prompts and assess whether it can be made to violate its policies. Stronger human in the loop oversight and escalation protocols. Wherever content is flagged, there should be rapid escalation, human review, and an immediate removal of blocking of any model feedback loops that might learn from that content. And finally, transparency to the public. XAI should publish summaries of how many CSAM or borderline prompts were flagged, how many were blocked, error rates, and what the corrective steps they have taken. In summary, the revelations are abhorrent and demand accountability. I'd say the responsible thing to do is to condemn the lapses, call for immediate reforms, and stress that with tech as powerful as this, we cannot afford safety by hope. We require safety by design, especially where children are concerned.
Thanks, Johannes. That's great advice. And Meta's artificial intelligence system Llama is the latest toolkit from a US tech giant to be approved by the American government for use in its agencies. The update comes several weeks after Google's Gemini, OpenAI's ChatGPT, and Anthropic's Claude were sanctioned for use in government operations. Llama's adoption is to be backed by assurance from the General Services Administration, or the GSA, that the large language model, or LLM, meets the government's security and legal standards. GSA is the procurement arm of the US government. Johannes, do you have any insights for how these models will be used by the government agencies and what risks there are for incorporating AI into the US government?
The General Services Administration has added Meta's open source Llama models to its government wide buying programs so agencies can acquire and deploy Llama under pre negotiated terms and compliance checks, joining earlier GSA actions that made Google's Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, and OpenAI's ChatGPT available through Schedule 1 Gov agreements. Expect near term use where generative AI is already proving valuable inside the government, like knowledge search and drafting for contracts, grants, and rulemaking, contact center assistance, software code support, records and FOIA triage, and multilingual translation. GOA reports that agencies' generative AI use cases grew ninefold from 2023 to 24, with most concentrated in mission support workflows, exactly the kind of tasks I just listed. So the risks are clear. The risks are leakage of sensitive data, inaccurate outputs that make their way into official records, discriminatory outcomes in public facing uses, supply chain tampering of models, and ordinary vendor lock in. NIST AI Risk Management Framework and its generative AI profile map these hazards and the controls, testing, red teaming, provenance, access controls, and auditability. The good news is that agencies are not flying blind. OMB's 2025 memoranda require chief AI officers, public AI use inventories, and streamlined but accountable procurement, while CISA's joint guidance gives concrete steps for deploying externally developed AI securely. Expect most agencies to start with low risk internal tasks, then move to higher impact users as safeguards mature.
Thanks, Johannes. And recently, the Nobel laureate Maria Ressa delivered the global call for AI red lines to prevent unacceptable AI risks to the UN General Assembly, referring to a letter signed by 200 world leaders, including multiple Nobel laureates, AI experts, and former heads of state. Personally, I feel these needed to be in place 10 to 20 years ago, Johannes, but do you feel there's still runway to create such red lines, or is it just too late?
Well, Tiffany, the horses have left the stable, the cows have left the barn, and referring back to today's grok story, the genie is out of the bottle. But that said, Maria Ressa's call at the UN General Assembly for AI red lines is substantive, it's not just symbolic. The campaign asks governments to negotiate clear, testable prohibitions by the end of 2026, backed up by enforcement on uses and behaviors that pose unacceptable risk, and it has support from Nobel laureates, former heads of state, and leading researchers. What counts as a real red line? Two things matter. First, unacceptable uses, for example, enabling bioweapons development. Second, unacceptable behaviors of systems themselves, for example, autonomous self replication or breaking into computer systems. That distinction, emphasized by the OECD's AI policy work, keeps the focus on verifiable pre deployment safety rather than after the fact punishment. On specifics, Stuart Russell and others have long argued for bright lines against self replication and cyber infiltration, with safety cases proved in advance, akin to how nuclear regulators require evidence that red lines will not be crossed. Those are measurable and enforceable today. And that's the UN General Assembly for you. It moves deliberately. The good news is that the UN has stood up two mechanisms: the Global Dialogue on AI Governments and an independent international scientific panel on AI through a 2025 General Assembly action, giving every country a seat and a scientific backbone for exactly this kind of agreement. It's good that they do this. At minimum, we may get a global legal framework. So, will it have any impact? If states translate and countries translate red lines into pre deployment safety cases, procurement rules, and penalties for violations, yes, it will. If not, well, the AI industry is moving too fast for the UN. Still, it's late, not too late. The window is narrowing, but it has not closed yet.
Thanks, Johannes. Unfortunately, by the end of 2026, I think that will be too late. So they need to hurry. And Wiliot recently announced a collaboration with Walmart to revolutionize supply chain operations. And this work represents the first large scale deployment of ambient IoT technology in the retail sector, with millions of Wiliot IoT pixels being integrated throughout Walmart's supply chain. Walmart's advanced AI systems, in combination with Wiliot's ambient IoT technology, is designed to dramatically enhance supply chain efficiency, inventory accuracy, and cold chain compliance. Wiliot's IoT pixels are being used to track Walmart's pallets at scale, with a goal of reaching 90 million by the end of 2026. This initiative stands as one of the largest ambient IoT deployments to date, providing a new source of supply chain data for Walmart's expanding use of AI. Johannes, do you feel that this level of real time insights and inventory management will set a new standard for retail operations?
The short answer is yes, Tiffany, especially for grocery and time sensitive categories. Ambient IoT means tiny, battery free sensors that harvest energy and send brief Bluetooth signals. Instead of occasional barcode or RFID scans, you get continuous location and condition data, presence and temperature, wherever readers are installed. At Walmart's scale, that matters. Continuous pallet level signals feed existing AI with fresher facts that support real time inventory accuracy, early detection of cold chain issues, labor and dock scheduling tied to actual arrivals, smart pallet building and routing, and faster resolution of shorts and damage. It also tightens chain of custody and creates shareable events for suppliers. Will this set a new retail standard? I believe it will, with three caveats. First, coverage. Readers in distribution centers, yards, trailers, and backrooms must be dense enough to hear tags through metal and liquids. Second, governance. Clean master data, clear access controls, and common event formats so partners act on the same data stream. Third, economics. Tags must stay at cent level cost and be reused at scale. If those conditions hold, a Walmart-sized proof will tip the market. Expect a new benchmark first in perishables and pallet or case flows, with RFID remaining for item level in many categories. The likely end state is hybrid, ambient signals for continuous awareness, RFID for rapid identification, and AI turning both into decision.
Thanks, Johannes. And we'll hear more about ambient IoT and ambient intelligence during the Summit of Things. And the fourth annual Summit of Things is a 3-day virtual event, which will take place October 21st to the 23rd. Featuring a dynamic lineup of global leaders, the event features panel discussions, keynotes, and fireside chats that will sharpen your skills and expand your mind. Get a high-level overview of the emerging capabilities of AI and IoT with sessions covering the new ways that IoT is powering AI-driven insights to create a more connected world, organizations turning data into real-time decisions with intelligent infrastructure, the real-world impact of emerging technologies on humans and businesses, a 90-day blueprint for turning AI experiments into business outcomes, and transforming innovation through a new mindset. You can see the full agenda and get your free pass now at iotmktg.com. Anything to add about the upcoming Summit of Things, Johannes?
It's our flagship event, Tiffany, and this year we have a fantastic lineup of speakers delivering cutting-edge presentation. This is absolutely a must-attend summit, and you definitely don't want to miss the latest developments from TechScope Connect.
Thank you, Johannes. And thank you all for watching. That's all we have time for today, but we'll see you soon at the Summit of Things. So be sure to grab your free pass now at iotmktg.com. We'll see you again next month. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tiffany.